This episode of Bass Freaks is brought to you by the Mxr Bass Compressor. The Mxr Bass Compressor is a powerful bass comp that allows you to fine-tune your sound from subtle peak limiting to hard squash compression. It's a totally transparent comp to give you control over attack, release, ratio, input, and output. It also has an easy-to-use LED that allows you to meter your signal threshold on the fly. It's an essential piece of gear that no bass player should be without and is great for both live and studio applications. Go to jimdunlop.com and check out the Mxr Bass Innovations Bass Compressor. What is up, my friends? Welcome to Dunlop Presents Bass Freaks. This is a place for all of us bass freaks to chat it up, get a little insight and inspiration, and have some fun with some great bass players. I'm your host, Josh Paul, and today we welcome my friend Sean Hurley to the show. Big round of applause for Sean.
Woo! Woo! Oh, hello. Hey, great to see you, Josh.
You know what? I liked your walk-on. That was really... No one could see it.
Thank you. I did not slip. It was real pro.
Yeah, we were just talking about, before the show started, the different pants that we wear for different occasions nowadays.
Absolutely.
Due to the changes in the world that seem to have occurred in the last year or two. So what are you wearing now?
Today I am sporting some soft pants made by a company that, I'm not getting paid to wear them, so I'm not going to say, but they're really great. They fit well, and I'm really proud to rep them when I walk outside, and, it feels good. I had hard pants on earlier, and then when I came back in, it's like to get that vibe that I want to chill with a friend and chat, have a little coffee. I got them soft pants on, and I'm loving it.
I'm with you. I started off in soft pants. I'm just gonna roll with the soft pants as long as I possibly can.
Great.
And always with a cup of coffee. So cheers to you, brother.
Cheers to you, Josh.
You have broken in to the session world in LA. Like when I say broken into, I mean you dove in and took it by storm.
I read about it in Bass Player magazine when I was a kid growing up in Western Mass, and I thought, it's like, okay, whether you pick New York or LA, and then you land and you announce, I want to do sessions, and I'm not sure who you're supposed to tell, but that's, in my mind, that was supposed to be how it worked, and it didn't quite work out as seamlessly as that, but somehow by being in a studio, that led to another one, that led to another one, that led to another one. Although I'm sure the studio scene has changed dramatically since what I read about in the magazines to what I experienced, but I'm grateful that I got to get into a lot of studios and be considered a studio bass player.
Okay, so I know we have a lot of listeners that are not necessarily bass players or just starting out or maybe haven't done sessions or gone on tour and quite the opposite. They are pros and there are colleagues, esteemed musician friends. But let's talk about the definition of a session player.
Well, I don't think has changed much since what we would have read about Lee Sklar, Will Lee, Chuck Rainey, even James Jamerson. The job that I thought it would be and what it turned out to be is to work with the artist, the producer, whoever's in charge and who's got the material that's landing on your music stand, and then try to diagnose like what do they need from me? Do they need me to just play the ink where it's all written out, and so you have to have that skill set ready to go, or are they playing you a demo tape with just an acoustic guitar and a piano and vocal and going, hey, there's a big C, A minor, D minor, G, 4 bars up chord progression, and we got to make it feel cool. So then you got to draw on this other thing where there's nothing to draw on other than chords, and they have an idea for a feeling they want out of you. I don't think that much has changed because it's been, in my experience, the 20 plus years I've been doing it. I see those things almost weekly. One day it's this, very scripted, and so you have to have that high level of, hey, this is what you were practicing for to get into music college, and out of it, it's the same game. And then the other thing of, hey, you show up in a room with a bunch of guys and you got to create music out of thin air.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like a dream job for so many people. What is the ratio on what you actually get to throw some of yourself into creating wise, or just, as you say, playing the ink?
For my world, because what I've learned is there's so many differences. Like that whole range can be, one guy can be doing all the ink stuff, another guy can be doing all the creative stuff. I fall somewhere on the come in with a blank slate world because of my success with singer-songwriter people, or by working with vocalists mainly. It just attracts other artists, other producers that are producing solo artists that the person doesn't have a band. And that often is, maybe there's a demo, but often there's just a performance in the studio, or there might be a MP3 sent with a acoustic guitar or a rough demo. In that world, so if you walk into that, for me, it's probably 75% just come up with something cool, help us, make the song feel like this genre or feel like that, or it's got to make me want to move. And that I enjoy a lot. The ink world has lessened for me, and I still, when I've got one tomorrow, when it comes up, when I take a look at it, it's like, all right, this is very cool, but it's just not my everyday. And I'm kind of, you can't really plot out your exact course, and I'm grateful for, I realize that I really get excited about the artist that's like, sometimes they're not even sure if they love their song anymore because they've spent so much time with it. They bring it through the producer. It goes through all these tests. Then they bring it to the studio floor. And if you can make them fall in love with something based on what you do, if they fall in love with their song all over again, that's kind of a special feeling, where when you're just playing a scripted part, often the reward is cool, but it's really short-lived because you're just bringing to life something that's been temped up.
Dude, I love that. I love that insight. And I love that actually just shows that you care about what you're doing.
Indeed, yeah. I still have the same excitement, which luckily, everyone I run into, even though we've been at it 20 or 30 years, they seem to, you suit up and you go for it, and everybody still gets as excited and, a little bit concerned when it's not getting there, and everybody still attacks it. I have yet to be in a room where anybody was, signing off too early, or they were jaded about it. Everybody from the drummer all the way to the producer that I tend to run with in LA is like, they're going for gold every time.
That's awesome, and good for you on that.
It's a good community.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, one of the things I love about your playing is your, I guess, use of space. You leave a lot of space, which works well.
I guess it's who I
amazing.
am.
It works well with vocalists and a lot of the music that you tend to work on. I mean, I was looking at your discography earlier, and it's large. Hey, bro, you got a very large discography.
Well, I saw you looking at my discography, and I blushed a little bit.
So you, Vertical Horizon, John Mayer, it said Gwen Stefani, which I didn't know that you did that.
Did a couple Christmas records with her.
Very cool.
Just the last couple of years. And those were a lot of fun because they had like a 60s throwback, all that classic Darlene Love kind of sound. That was a lot of fun. So you just grab it. If you play with the artist, throw it on your discography.
Yeah. How many records actually have you played on?
That I don't know. I'd have to check. I for a while I heard that Kenny Aronoff would save his charts that he would make, and he's a big chart maker reader. He does it really with great accuracy. So I started saving mine, and I had folders, and at some point I had to change my tune, and like if it was somebody that wasn't a bigger artist that I thought I might play live with, I started not worrying about saving the charts, because I make a 2-page chart basically for every tune, and there's got to be thousands that have gone through. So provided that they all were released, it's got to be, thousands, I would imagine, because it really gets up there in 20 years, and there's probably, 5 to 10 songs in a week that, at various times. It's just, it adds up quickly.
That's amazing, dude. Are there any highlights? Is there like one or two performances that you played on and you said, damn, I'm proud of that?
Well, there's a couple. They tend to be little wins. Like there was one kid I played with, Trevor Hall, who's still at it. He's out there. He's got a great following. not a big name that my neighbor's going to know who he is, but I remember doing the sessions with a producer that has since moved to Nashville, this guy Marshall Altman. I'm playing with my favorite musicians, Aaron Sterling's on drums, Zach Ray's on keys, I think Michael Chavez was on guitar. And it was, there's a lot of, when you're playing with a singer, the way I do it is I'm playing to support things. So there's not a lot of standout moments for me, but I like the credit of just playing, being the guy in the room that plays the right thing. And if you don't notice it, that's also cool. And there was the last song, I think, on the recording, they were going to change it up. The drummer and the keyboard player were both standing over a little MPC kind of thing, programming some drums or playing it live. Actually, I think they're doing it through Logic on a little keyboard. And then, so they were like, okay, this is all going to rely on you to do something like Come Together, like, where there's a definitive bass line that's simple, but it also is such a hook. So they even referenced the Chili Peppers. God, what is the song? Now I'm drawing a blank, but Crazy Town ended up sampling it for their tune. But, it's some high stuff, melodic stuff where the chords are all within the bass line. And I came up with one of those on the fly, and my musician friends are cheering. And that is, even if the audience doesn't hear it as like, oh, that's a really cool bass line, for me, impressing my bandmates or making them proud or having them dig what I'm doing has always been a highlight. So sometimes, I remember the first compliment I got from playing with Vertical Horizon was in the studio, and I was told, we're going to go record this record at Bearsville, which Jeff Buckley recorded there. The band recorded there. This has been a storied studio that's no longer there. Things have changed a bit, but this is late 90s. And I was told, hey, Tony Levin lives down the road, so if you don't cut it with the producer, like the band, we love you, but if the producer says you're not good enough, we're going to have to bring in a pro, and you'll still be our band guy, and you'll tour with us. So it was, all right, I got to be great. It's simple music where you have to just play the right part, play in tune, in time, basic pop rock. And I remember the assistant or one of the additional engineer programmer guys, we played the first pass of a song, and I was literally playing all whole notes for the verse with a pick. And then, maybe some half notes later, this is what the song was. It's what the singer wanted. And the guy, Mark came up to me. He's like, hey, man, I know you're great because every downbeat, you nailed it. It was so perfect. We were recording to tape, so there was going to be no nudging or moving. And he gave me a compliment like, no one else was listening to you, but I was, and I thought you were great because you were flawlessly hitting the downbeat. That felt good. It was the right time. And like, you don't get a second chance to play a whole note. You do it, and there's no makeup and on tape. So I took that as, okay, I was going to make the cut for the record, but also, those fundamentals are so valuable. And now, you can apply it to any other thing or, sports, whatever, but fundamentals, if they're not there. And so I just got excited, like, okay, my instincts of trying to be a pro on the simplest stuff, I can always expand and try to play better, faster, more interesting lines. But if I can get the fundamentals perfectly so that when you play the simplest, dumbest thing, someone goes, wow, that was great, then I know I'm on the right path. And that's the one that would be what would lead me to, hey, I play with some space and with some singers because I'm giving them moments to do the shining things, and I will create the bed that allows them to fly to their highest heights.
And you do it well.
Thank you.
What do you think? What is your approach to coming up with the right line?
Well, this is in the world I'm living in. It's like it's not in the abstract. So we're not walking on stage and going, okay, let's play free, avant-garde, whatever, go for it. Which there's a place for that. I got friends that can do that and they excel. Tim LaFave, I know, is one I can think of, like, boom, sound check jam, and then they do a thing and it's amazing. The world I'm going in, there's these walls up here. So you got to do something cool within these limitations. That's my favorite thing. You got tempo, that's a limitation. You got chords, that's a limitation. If you have a singer and you have a melody, there's a big limitation because you cannot conflict with any of those things. There's no fights that are going to be picked and won. So what do you do with that? I just listen, blank slate. Okay, 4 chords. What's happening? Does it need movement? What does it need from the rhythm section? What's the kick drum going to do? I long ago stopped caring about what the kick drum pattern is. Where I remember early on,
interesting,
before starting a session or a song, it's like, oh, what are you going to do for your kick drum pattern? I haven't asked that or even thought that in about 15 years because this is controversial possibly, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to tell me what to play. It'll help inform me of what I want to do, but it's not going to define what I play. So I can play when the kick drum doesn't kick. I can also not play when the kick drum does kick. And so I'm just feeding off, I will react. Sometimes it's simple. It's like boom, boom, boom. Like if I hear a guy do that, it's like, oh, that's great. I'm going to join in with that. But it doesn't mean I have to figure that out. Like I'm talking about recording where we're going to define what gets played live. So let's explore. Like the drummer this is exploration mode. The drummer may be allowed to change pattern midway through because he's going, hey, that didn't work. Or you're responding to the vocal thing. And often it's by the third take where you're like, I know the song now. I know what the singer's singing. I know where those spaces are. I'm always listening for how long is the vocal phrase? Because I don't want to get into that competition too soon. Maybe later on in the song where you want a little interplay, but I tend to just be a listener and I might not even play for a couple measures, just hit some whole notes and just start to see, does anyone need me to push them forward? Does anyone need a little guidance? And again, this is imagining there's no demo tape. Sometimes you hear a demo and there's a steady 8th note bass line. And if that sounds awesome, it's like, great, I'll start there and then we'll add to that or we'll take away from that or we'll create space. The more limitations you give or the more guidance you give, I will be able to quickly run the numbers like we all do. It's like you've played so many songs 20 years in to your adult life. It's like, okay, I've tried to outsmart a song before and it didn't work. So I'm going to go, I'm going to do the thing that's got a high success rate and then see, this is what is better about recording with other humans to me. Because when you start getting nods and encouragement from the other people in the room, artist, producer, other musicians, that's when you're crushing it. When you're all alone in front of your screen and you're trying to imagine that what the producer's going to think of it, that gets a little harder. But luckily, you have this experience of like, oh, right, when I do that, I like it. And 9 times out of 10, my instincts have been in line with the person that I've recorded with or the possibilities, because I'm trying to sniff out the options. Like, where do you play the note? What octave do you play it in? That is already, before you even add rhythm, that is instantly going to give you a reaction, a feeling. Like, imagine a C on the 3rd fret of the A string versus a C on the 10th fret of the D string. Both C's, both root notes, those are not the same. That is a whole different scene, right? And it, to me, is like, well, I only have 2. There aren't really any other C's for me. I mean, maybe there's a low C on a 5 string and then there's an even higher C, but really, I've only got 2 good C's that are song worthy. And then we see what else we got. But
I like to play the 2 good C's.
Yeah, right.
Just so you know.
Then I've got 3 available. Like, this is just knowing your instrument. Like, I've never thought about it or put it into words like this, but it's always like, where am I going to play that D? Where am I going to play that E? Where am I going to play that F? Sometimes that's the one like, oh, could the chorus take the F on the 3rd fret of the D, on the 8th fret of the A, or does it demand being the 1st fret of the E string? Like, that will tell you what you're doing a lot of times.
I dig that.
I don't know. I'm just winging it, man. This is
You're throwing it out there. I
Yeah.
dig it. What do you think? Name maybe 3 things, if you can, that go into creating a great bass line.
Well, I think supporting the song or serving the song is number one. And that is, now throw out everything I've said before. You can do, depending on who you are as a player and what your voice is, that could be the busiest thing. Like Jocko, John Entwistle, Flea, like they all do some really like demanding, hey, look at me. This is what I'm defining the tune. This is get on my back. I got us. We're doing everything. So doing something that supports the song. I mean, if Flea didn't do what he does, the Chili Peppers would have this gaping hole of like, well, where's the rest of the song?
Yeah.
So supporting the song, and that doesn't mean just playing dumb and playing simple. Then, again, I think that's kind of, it's probably, you only need that one thing, because if you're really listening and you're really playing well with others, you're gonna figure out like how to move the song along, how to create a sub hook. It may not need it, but whatever you can do to support that song to help lift it. Like we all know that feeling of, hey, what's dynamics, like following the song's dynamics. And then how we all have those same limitations. How many notes does it take to create a classic bass line? I'm always looking, hey man, McCartney did it with just a few with Come Together. He did it with just a few with Taxman. Flea did it with just a few by using a different technique, or just a few, Blood Sugar Sex Magic was a big record for me. And so you could look, there's a ton of different styles on that. So like take your pick, and they're all kind of, if you subbed out me in the band, I wouldn't like it as much. So I think just finding a unique way to be you in a song, because if you're in that stew, that kind of makes it like, Bob Babbitt plays a little differently than James Jamerson. They both create great bass lines. It's such an elusive, Zen-like art. Like, what is it the simplicity of it? Or, I think about Tom Sawyer, which was one of the first bass lines that I probably would have sung before I even knew it. Ding, ding, ding.
How cool is that, though, that you can still sing that?
Right. That is, it stuck in so deep with one hearing. So I think about that. Now we know, this is the question I always think about. If I ever doubt, like, well, what are my instincts wrong? Well, for me, I'm fortified enough to go, hey, I've tested them. I'm going to stick with my gut, and then I will take the guidance of those around me who also have a skin in the game, right? So if they want more from me, I'm happy to give. If they want less from me, happy to give. But you think about, Geddy Lee was capable of anything, but yet Tom Sawyer, there's a bit of, other than the tone, which is really hard to get, just out of the box. You got to kind of chase that. It's kind of a simple line, but yet the song is like, that's brilliant. That's as good a line as that song could ever have. He could have played more, but he didn't. So I try to reflect on, like, how do these guys do it with simplicity, and it's still a great bass line? I don't know if this can be distilled down to the 3 tenets of what makes a great bass line, because Kiss has a lot of great bass lines, and Gene Simmons isn't known for his like fluidity or his ability on the bass, but you like Detroit Rock City. If any of us came up with something different, it'd be like, yeah, I don't like it,
Right,
but I
right.
like what Gene played. So I don't know. It's hard to like, how do you get famous? What makes an iconic line? It's such an elusive, moving target.
Good points. Let's go back a little bit.
All right.
Talk about how you even started playing bass and why the bass.
That is a simple story, because I had, I was so young. I was 11, I think. Yeah, I was 11. I played the saxophone when I was 10. I liked it. My music teacher, this is a school program, you can pick a wood instrument, or you pick a string. One kid would maybe play the snare drum. So the coolest thing was to play the saxophone. That was about as rock and roll as you could get. And then I played it, but I was 10. I didn't continue it through the summer. They gave you that option. And the next year when 5th grade started, I was 11. The teacher called me in and was like, hey, you didn't continue with the sax. And I was so into sports, I just kind of forgot about music, and I liked listening to it, but didn't really pursue it. But because he called me in, I still remember it. It was like, oh, he thought I had musical talent. That's something that when someone says it, you don't forget it, or at least I didn't. So then later that year, like the end of the school year in May, a friend of my brother's who was a drummer, who's 4 years older, 5 years older, he had said, hey, man, what do you play? And I didn't play anything. He's like, well, you should play the bass. Come on up and watch my band, and you can take lessons from the kid, Kevin, who plays in my band. These would have all been like 16, 17-year-olds. So being invited to the basement while they're rocking out was kind of rad. So, and then I think I was hanging with some friends who was like, hey, what do you play? No, oh, I like drums. All right, you should come up and learn drums from me. Hey, what do you play? Oh, guitar. All right, great. So we all went up, and because I was told to focus on the bass player, he looked cool. I still remember the strap he had for his bass. He had one of those acoustic padded bass amps with the glowing purplish, bluish thing. You'll recognize it if I send you a picture.
Okay.
And so I took lessons from him. He was great. He taught me to read from day one. So when I was 11,
Nice.
I was learning. Yeah, it was go out and get a bass. My dad drove me. I was in Western Mass. We went to Albany, New York. I got a Hagstrom bass. It was relatively easy enough to play. I got the blisters on the fingers, the whole thing. But the kid who was teaching me he had the right approach. Like, oh, hey, you like stuff on the radio. Broken Wings from Mr. was out. That had a great bass line. Like that song, there's yet another example of a classic bass line. Real simple. Not much is going on other than the bass line driving the tune. And then there was some Kiss tunes, but I just mentioned, I like these. So he would teach me that while I was also going through a Mel Bay book, learning how to read. So as you're physically unable to make sounds with the thing and learning how to do that, I was being guided to, hey, that string that you're trying to hit, that's the E. This is what it looks like on the staff. So by the time I could play, within 2 years, I'm in bands, everything's good. My reading was right there at the same level.
That's amazing. All at once.
Yeah, it was fortunate because I remember watching a Jocko video, and he could play so well so early and didn't learn to read, and so he had to learn later. And to slow that down when you can already blast was a bit of a drag for him. But everything went at the same pace. We're like, okay, now I'm learning how to play with more finesse, fluidity, and the reading was, these are ways, okay, you can increase your speed by reading these things, working on this, working on that. So I was able to do it all together. So I really attacked it. And so by 6th grade, I was really into it, looking for opportunities to play with friends, learn tunes, challenge ourselves. I got into the prog rock stuff, Zeppelin, like anything that older kids were like, hey, do you know how to play this? I would go and learn how to play. And there was always a hunt for a bass player. So I had a lot of contact with people older than me because they're like, you have a bass? You play? All right, come on over here, blah, blah, blah. Or you got to check this out, or let's hang out. And I got into some hooligan, not that I did anything wrong, but I hung out with some people that were into some terrible things just because that's what the musicians were doing back then.
That's very cool, man. A lot of these shows that we've done for Bass Freaks, the majority of the players have discussed their time in music class at school, and that being one of the sole factors that has encouraged them to even start playing music and the bass. And I find it really unfortunate that they're, removing so many programs.
Yeah, and because I've got kids, anyone with kids, you realize like you've got boots on the ground, so you're going, wait, they're not offering this, they're not offering that. I've had conversations. It does break my heart because I would take a bass with a gig bag and walk it to school because there was an opportunity to play 3 days a week. And then I remember seeing a buddy of mine, he was playing in the auditorium one day. It just the fact that there was music actually being played by students and things, I don't know what we can do to change it. Everything seems to have, it's like that's what they cut when they're in a budget crunch, and it really, it's definitely heartbreaking.
Well, the benefits outweigh the cost, I would say.
By a gazillion to one, right?
Yeah,
And my wife being in the mental health field, it's like that. If you have a healthy diet of music and art, you get better at math. It increases all of your cognitive functions. That it's a shame that they're pinpointing and trying to make everything, be science and math when they're missing out on the part. Because so many of the doctors that I would see when I moved to LA, just going for a regular checkup, they're like, I would see them at the NAMM show. Like a lot of the dudes were musicians too, because it just kind of went hand in hand. If you're smart, a lot of times you have this little musical curiosity and an ability to learn it. And when you can explore it in school, you don't have to devote your life to it, but a little spattering is like, it makes you a well-rounded human, and it increases your taste and your growth mindset.
1,000%. And not only that, for me personally, it kept me out of a lot of trouble.
Sure. Right, because you have structure. Like, structure is everything when you're a kid. And when you have those, hey, come to band practice, or even if it's extracurricular, beyond band stuff, it's like there's a community that you're part of, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, man. How do you feel about reaching back and supporting new players up and coming?
I'm a big fan of what everybody's doing, and with Instagram, I think I just get a thrill out of seeing people with a bass in their hands doing stuff. So the names escape me, but I watch every day like somebody doing something that I think it would have been harder for us when we were kids, because you're limited. There was no YouTube, no Instagram. You'd have to. It seemed like there were only 10 bass players in the world.
Right, totally.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do.
Now seeing young people play, even the youngest kids, Aaron, the bassist, like I watch stuff. I've pulled things from Instagram many times. If I hear somebody doing something cool, I pull it, I screen record it, turn it into audio, put it into Pro Tools, and just learn these little chunks of like, what did somebody play over this little pentatonic thing? What did somebody do here? What did somebody do there? And it's so many young people, because that's an avenue that feels like a gig in a way, that they're out there just sharing their enthusiasm for the instruments. I love it. And I feel like, because I'm into, like a lot of musicians, we just want to keep learning and keep getting excited about it. So when I hear somebody playing the same 4 strings, same note, same 2 good C's, when they do something, totally. Oh man, I love it. I love it, because bass kind of ebbs and flows into what is cool. Like there's a lot of pop tunes my kids listen to, and there's no bass on it, so no actual played bass, and I don't mind it, but I like seeing the excitement of like, hey, there's a bass player, a bass line, a thing happening with that instrument. Right.
And fortunately, young people, or anyone really, are exposed to bass by Instagram or by YouTube, and like you said earlier, all you can do is kind of watch music videos that were on MTV when you could, or buy a record. But now it's just really in your face, which I love. I'm stoked on it.
Yeah, and the niche of the community of bass, it's like if you know. So once the algorithms, like I get new things of different bass players all the time, and I just love it, because I realize everyone's still getting affected by music. They're getting inspired by something they saw, and that's causing them to go deep and attack this thing. And you're like, oh, wow, it's a never-ending well of enthusiasm for this instrument that can be played well alone, and then when you put it in context with a band and a song, it's like it still gets people excited.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. You're headed to a session for John Mayer. What 3 pieces of gear are you taking with you?
Well, for me, this is not a John call out of the blue, although there was my first John session.
So okay, all right. So let's talk about the difference from then and now.
Right. The difference is, so let's take the first one. It's like if John calls, so you already, it's basically, hey, if A-list guy calls you, what do you bring? Well, you want to bring all the right stuff. If they're calling you for one song, this is where I'm probably too much of a worrier, but it's like, I don't want to be a try-hard where I'm like, I'm going to bring 10 basses and 3 amps to a one-song session. And the first thing I ever did with John was a day with Alicia Keys in 2006, and he called me the day before and was like, hey, can you come in and play on a day with, we're going to do a song or two. So I didn't want to bring 10 basses. I am a
You just brought a kazoo.
Right, exactly. And I really boom, boom. But I have a 3 to 5 bass thing where I can try to figure out, okay, I got to have this bass, this bass, this bass. Got to have my 3 core depending on who it is, what it is. And then I got 2 variables. And if I can't do it with those, I can adjust something to get it. It's like, this is the benefit of having the equipment gathered and sort of figured out over time. But what's different now from then is I could probably walk in with 2 basses.
All right, what are they? Which
it's
ones?
going to be 1 or 2. It's going to be a P bass with rounds or a P bass with flats. And I have the 2 that I've recorded on other recordings. So every time you record a song and the artist likes it and then they put it out on the record, you can then go, hey, I used this bass on this tune. Do you like that, or should we try something else for this?
Okay. Why the P bass?
For me, I learned I don't like to be wrong. So
why be wrong when you can be right?
Be right, exactly. So like I said, I got 2 good C's, so I got a 50-50 chance. My trouble growing up where I grew up, because I know some people grow up in LA and they get to this information sooner, or maybe they see it on YouTube and they get it. Nobody told me, other than a couple guys like, oh, you got to have this. And again, depending on what your age is and when you grew up, you'll have like, oh, this is cool, this is not cool. You remember GK and Harkey? Like that was all the ads I saw, had Will Lee and Stu Ham and even Jack Bruce. And it's like, okay, I'll have a GK and a Harkey. So you go through that. I showed up in LA with 2 basses, and one of them was a fretless. So I was going to be playing 1 bass. And I remember having success with it with the one particular situation. And when I went to use it in the next situation, which was our friend Robin Thicke, I played and they're like, oh, you're great. Love your playing. I was brought in from a friend. So it was already like, welcome to the family. It wasn't an audition setting, but the recording they were not happy with the tone of the instrument. Not that this instrument doesn't sound good, but that wasn't the sound they were looking for. And then as a 1 bass man at that, because this, I would have been flying in. So I'm with 1 bass and I'm being told they don't like it enough. Like, oh, we'll fix it later, or we'll do something, or we'll however. And you're like, what do you do? If you're me, you go, I can never be in this situation again, right? I don't like this feeling. I don't believe in one instrument so much that I'm going to fight for it. I go, well, what should I play? What would you rather hear? And my friend, who is the guitar player, he happened to have a passive P bass, and he handed it over because he was flying back and forth, and inevitably there's always a bass lying around. He handed it to me. He's like, well, try this. And I played it. And I had played it before because he had it around his house in Boston. And they're like, oh, that's great. Yeah, that sits in the mix better. So if you're me, I go, if I don't have one of these by tomorrow, I'm doing it wrong. So then I would test it out. This is early 2000s. I'd go to a session and I remember one in particular, I think they're going to love this bass. It's like, no, it's when the chorus comes, I'm losing you. Okay, so I switched to another bass. That's cool for the verses, but the chorus is not happening. So you figure out, you do these tests of like, God, the one that keeps winning was this P bass. So I should make sure I've got, okay, God, I got to have a round wound one because a lot of the pop stuff, it speaks better when the hi-hats and guitars are over it or synths, whatever high-end stuff. But it's like, well, I really should have a flat wound P-bass. All right, so eventually you just start chasing like what's been winning the most in your arsenal, and then get if there are options, like, okay, if there's two classic options, P-bass with round, P-bass with flats, let me make sure I have that. I kept bringing my jazz bass with me, and anytime I test it out, I remember I did the same test with active versus passive. I had two identical Lakeland 5-strings that the song needed a 5-string, so I played the passive one first, and they got a sound. They're like, "Oh, that's great." I said, "Hey, before we move on, let me play." And these were friends. I was getting to know them, and we were relaxed, taking our time. I said, "Let me try this other one just to rule it out, see if you don't like it." An active version of the same bass. And immediately, even the assistant, they're generally not encouraged to opine on the tone of things. He got on the talk back and was like, "No, the first bass," and he was like, "That one's terrible," or like he hated it, whatever it was.
Okay.
So I was like, okay. So I literally stopped using that bass on any session, and I found, okay, this passive one is a winner, and that's how I went to. I'm never gonna play anything that's active in a studio because it's only gotten me heartache. It was the thing. Now, this is just me. I used to think I had answers to all problems. Turns out I only have answers for myself in my particular world. But that is how it just the slow drift. It's kind of glacial. And then suddenly it's like I'm always playing this one particular P bass. Anytime I try something else, and sometimes it's like, hey, we would love to hear a Hofner. I'm down for anything, but the P bass kept winning, and so much so it's like 3 songs in, they're like, damn, I didn't even notice how this is so good. The bass is so good. They just keep moving on. It's like, oh, drums are perfect, great. Next song. And then they're like, oh, hey, Sean, great job. By the way, almost didn't you notice you there. It was so perfect. We didn't have to think about it. Not even, it's like when you pull up the right vocal mic, you don't go, oh, gosh, but is there something better? It's like, no, that sounds amazing. Let's go on. Okay, start singing. And that's the way when they treat me like that, I'm like, great. Yeah. If I don't stand out in that world, that is a sign of like, yeah, you're killing it, because we don't have to, because I have been targeted like, yeah, something's not right. And when we notice it's like noticing the tone of the kick drum. Like, yeah, if it doesn't sound good, we're shut everything down. We got to start from scratch, because if the low end is not correct, the song is going to be tough to build on.
Yeah. You're so right. I had a producer tell me one time, if I don't notice you, you're doing it right. Once I actually finished the session, I was like, okay, I understand. So yeah, you're right.
It can be tough now, that's not what you want to hear in your formative years when you're like, but I'm trying to see if what I'm doing is good. And if you don't notice me, how do I know can you give me any constructive criticism?
Give me some validation, please.
Right. But when you've done it again and again and again, and they're like, yeah, we don't have to worry about you. Like, you're the guy that I trust implicitly. So I'm allowed to. There's so much money that's being spent way above your frequencies. So if they can focus on that, like a singer's voice can tire, other things can be of a concern. So if they don't have to worry about you and they can just keep moving on and then thank you at the end of the day, you are doing it right. I love to get paid with compliments, but I also understand the simplicity of like, hey, if you do it right and you take away any guesswork, it's like driving on a road with no potholes. Like, you don't have to thank the city at the end of your drive, but you can go like, that was awesome.
I like that analogy. I like that. Do you use any specific outboard preamp or anything?
I've been thinking about this recently. The answer is no, because so much of the time I'll show up somewhere and what's available to me is not always consistent from studio to studio. So a lot of times they'll plug me into a Neve pre. Sometimes it's an API. Sometimes I don't even get a good look. Like, what are they doing in there? And I go in, it sounds great. And I don't even think to go, hey, where am I going through the console? Am I something outboard? I do know there are some great boards in LA that sound great. I know there's some great outboard gear. Every time I plug into a Neve, everything's cool. I go to home studios and we're doing the best we can. And it always, I try to take it on, what am I giving to them? I try to do the right bass. I've switched over years ago I fell in love with a Noble DI, so I always
I was
going to
ask you about that. How do you like those?
I like it a lot, and that was a discovery through Instagram. Kind of, there was a lot of heat coming up from these guys, like, oh, I love this, the best thing I've ever heard. I'm like, it's a DI, bro. There can't be, like, you telling me, really? It's like, is it really about the tires? Like, okay, so I'm going to give this thing a shot. And it was incrementally better than what I had been using. I liked it, blind taste test, even putting it before my amp. So that's when I said, all right, I don't know if the hype is real, but I certainly prefer it. And since it is my profession, I will spend whatever it takes to sound to what I think is the best. So that's where I'm trying to deliver, hey, bass, DI, and then the producer has a skill set. The artist has a taste. So once I turn it into the control room, I allow them to do their thing, and it's a team effort where they may, I've had conversations with Mxr's engineer, Chad. We were doing a record in 2011, Born and Raised, and he was, recording me over and over again. So he's going, man, I stopped using a compressor on you because I don't need it, and it allows me, like, I just plug you into the Neve and that's it. And because he would have plugged me into a compressor to do what he normally does and gone, I like the sound of Sean without the compressor because he doesn't need to be held back. It's not, I like to use a compressor at times because it's a tonal shift. It does something to the tone when you're using a good one, but it's a lot of times they teach engineers like, oh, and the bass player is spiky or doesn't have great technique, you can use a compressor to keep them in check.
Right.
And when you work with better engineers, they're going, all right, that's coloring it in a way that I don't think I need, so I want to use. And early on in my Robin Thicke days, a guy was like, I love your tone. I feel like I could plug you in right into the back of the tape machine and it would sound awesome. Like, I don't need to do anything to get you where I want it to sit in the mix. So things like that are, when kids on Instagram, not always kids, adults, they'll ask, hey, what are you going through? I keep forgetting to say, I'm turning in a bass, my thing, through a DI, maybe something through an amp with a little drive, but I can't tell you what the engineer is doing or where their skill set is, because everybody is doing something. They're plugging me into a Neve possibly, which if you don't have that at home, which a lot of us don't, it's going to be, and then what's the mixer doing? A lot of the guys were judging like, oh, I love that sound. Like, well, it was produced, recorded, and mixed beyond what I was able to turn in. So
those are all great points because you really don't even think about that. You just listening to the outcome.
About it. Right.
You're
so you're going, hey, I hear that. So what did you do to get that? Like, very few of us are watching over the mixer's shoulder to go, is he putting a low, like a band compressor to really tighten up the low end and stuff? It's hard to say, but all we can do is go, hey, what was our front end? What did we turn in for our homework, and see how it was filtered.
It's great. What about strings? What kind of strings do you use?
I've as a kid, I think the first bass and every bass, I would use Diodario's. They were nickel plated, and I got a taste for nickel. So when someone put steels on a bass, they felt so weird to me. I was like, what's wrong? Why don't these feel the same to me? So for me, anything nickel plated round wound is what I'm all about. I just happen to fall in love with the Labella company. I love them for their flats. So I use Labella Deep Talking flats, or with, the name may have, I should pull up the strings, but I've been with the company so long that, some names, some branding has changed, but it's the flat wounds, the FL, I think is what they're called now, but Labella flats, which has been in existence since Jamerson was playing them. The gauges I use are 43 to 104. So I need the robust tone, but I don't need extra tension.
Okay.
So those for me are the perfect balance. I don't lose any of the tone. 43 to 104. Round wounds, I use the Labellas, but the nickel plated, and as long as it's 45, 105, I can put them on any bass, and the tension for rounds always seems to be uniform from company to company. It's where the flats tension comes in that I don't know why it's different, but every brand seems to be different. When I did my testing years and years ago, I settled on Labella and was fortunate enough to be introduced to them and have a great relationship with them through the years.
Fantastic. You have signature basses.
Well, there's a signature Fender Custom Shop P bass, and it comes in 3 colors because I'm not such a signature dude that it's not like, hey, it's the Jocko bass that looks like the one he played. This was just modeled after my 61 P bass that I'd been recording and using live with Mxr in 2012. And because of his ties with Fender at the time, I just kind of walked into the room at the head of the line. They're like, hey, let's make a copy of your bass. And they turned it into a production model. Not a production model, but it's a custom shop model. So anyone could buy it. You could buy it. When I say production model, I'm referring to like Justin Meldal Johnson has a line that is made in the production. So they make so many more of them.
I have one of those, actually.
Yeah, I do too. It's
I love that bass.
Yeah, it's even, I've got it always right next to me.
Mine's right about 4 feet out of reach, but it's here, right next to me.
It's so fun to play, like a Mustang. It just makes you want to play while you're watching TV, play. It's like, you just want to pick it up. The bass I have, because it's made by the Custom Shop, it's a signature model, but it takes months to be ordered and made, so
how close is it to what you're actually playing, and do you actually play that bass out on tour or in the studio?
Yeah, I was slow. It's a copy of my 61, but as we all know, it's hard to duplicate something that was made 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So even longer than 50 years ago, it's, we're coming up on, I don't know, we're 70 years or something. Like it's crazy. So they do amazing work with modeling. Hey, this is what the neck feels like. This is what the output of the pickups is. And so I was given 3 basses that were the copy of my 61, one in each color, and I settled on the charcoal frost one I preferred the look of, and I made sure, that one feels great. I think I even swapped a neck from one of the basses. I think that I took the neck of the white one and put it on, because these are made by hand and everything, there's a little uniqueness. So I fell in love with this color, with that feel, and I put it, kind of hybrided it together. I guess it's all the same. I'm sure you and I would notice differences, but I started using it on the road, and my tech said, hey, we're going to Brazil. Let's leave the vintage one home and take it. And in 2013, I started using this gray one more and more, and I put round wounds on the white one. But I now bring my gray Custom Shop Sean Hurley signature Fender, and I leave my 61 at home because I trust it. It sounds great. It feels great. And there's it hasn't changed over time where I've had to adjust my 61 with some weather changes, and it's showing its age, and there's issues like, okay, I had to adjust
She's delicate. She's delicate.
Yeah, and it didn't start out that way, but I've owned it for 10 years, so I've noticed these changes, and none of the changes in my signature ones I've owned for 8 years, and they've worked their way to the head of the pack. For live, always. But for recording now, everything I'm doing from home, I tend to be using, if I'm using a flat wound bass, I'm using my gray signature bass.
Very cool. You can't ask for more than that. I mean, that's awesome.
The proof is in the pudding, and I've communicated. It's a small world that we're living in the bass universe. Yeah. And the couple people that have bought these basses that have reached out to me, we're all easy to communicate together on Instagram. They have said to me that it's one of their favorite basses because they did a killer job. They do a great job at the Custom Shop making any instrument, but they take into account like, hey, what's the weight? It all goes into making the bass sound the way you want it. But we put this mute thing on it, so you can't get a bass that's got the flip up mute like I have on my bass unless you drill a hole in a bass. So it's a Jaguar mute that would have come on a Jaguar guitar. If you go into a store or if you see one online, in between the saddles and the regular trapeze bridge or whatever's going on in the Jaguar, there's a little flip up mute thing that I liked that idea when they showed it to me at the custom shop, because at the time I was always muting the bass. When I was playing with John, we always wanted the little foam to lessen the decay. This is for that Born and Raised record where he specifically asked, like, hey, if you use that bass, it was the 61, let's mute it a bit. So I put the foam in.
And
so
did you install that?
No, this is done by the custom shop. So when we settled on the model, they're like, hey, how do you want to deal with the foam issue?
Yeah.
And they said we could just sell it with a piece, or we could do, one of the guys had done this to a bass of his. He's like, we could do this. And I love the idea because you can flip it on or flip it off. It's like having a capo.
Right.
So I was like, great. When I want it, I flip it up. When I want it to not be there, I flip it down. And it was something, a mildly new twist on a regular P bass, because there's only so many things you can do to a P bass and have it still be a P bass. So this is how it comes, and the mute thing is just, one of the specs that we thought, hey, if you can have the mute already predefined rather than shoving in a ratty piece of foam or whatever you might try to source, we thought it was cooler. And I said, hey, you also have to put the labellas I use on there, because that will make it feel and sound like the bass I'm trying to duplicate. It's got to have the tension. To me, of flat wounds is such it's either a deal maker or a deal breaker. But anyway, that was a sign like, oh, they're taking this for real. They're buying the strings to make sure that they all have them.
That's very cool, man. Congratulations on that. And congratulations on actually making a bass that you use and love. Very cool. Love it.
Why, thank you.
What do you like any other basses besides Peace?
There's a lot I've got in my arsenal, and a friend of mine was encouraging me to play this Hofner on a tune, so I've kind of fallen back in love with that. That's a 69, the classic violin McCartney bass.
Yeah.
The Harmony H22 is like all the rage with the indie, the cool earthy sound. A lot of my friends in LA, if they didn't have one during this year and a half of being stuck at home, they've all picked one up because it's a relatively affordable, very cool, woody sound you're not going to get from any other source. It's hollow, but it's got a particular pickup from a particular era that's like, it's nothing else sounds like it, so it's got a real cool place in your toolkit.
Awesome. That's very cool too.
So and a lot of guys know about it, but you would recognize it if you saw it. But it's called the Harmony H22. But they don't make them anymore, so you got to buy an old one, and they're probably $1,200, $1,500.
Okay, very cool. What is something musically that people may not know about you?
Oh boy, probably everything that I can. I can play more than eighth notes. Oh, I can play faster than whole notes. I don't know. Well, I hear myself say it all the time, but my first love musically, even before I had a saxophone or a bass, was AC/DC, and it still goes deeply into my heart of beloved. I feel like the AC/DC rhythm section was definitive for, it's probably why I like to play simply, but also, hey, if you need me to join you on the riff, I'm in. It just, that foundationally is where my musical soul began and expanded out. I got into other things. I really did a long time of studying Jocko and trying to get into as much jazz theory that I could, but I've chosen a different path, and I try to utilize like, what's the simplest way to solve an equation? But that is, I guess, my love of AC/DC. I know every AC/DC song. I could join an AC/DC cover band tomorrow.
I think you should.
I would like to now that you mention it. That would be a lot of fun.
And I would come to see you every time.
We'll be playing the Ryman next week. So
okay, cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. What brings you joy and what inspires you?
Well, I still get a kick out of hearing new tunes. Like my daughter will send me a playlist, like what I'm listening to today. And when I listen to it and find myself really digging it, like the poppiest of pop, I still like myself for like, because you can't lie to yourself. Like you either like something or you don't. I still really like music. So I hear, like, I love Justin Bieber. I hear his voice. He sounds like the voice you would create in a perfectly angelic factory. Like, give me a great singer. Any song with a great singer, and I like discovering songs that I never heard before. An old Otis Redding song, or maybe an artist that I didn't hear their whole catalog because it was harder to come by. When we were kids, we're like, did you have every record from Donny Hathaway, or did you have every record from whoever it is? So hearing something that I never heard before and loving it, hearing a familiar voice, falling in love with a new song, or hearing a new tune. I still like scrolling through, like, what's a recommended something from Spotify, and finding a new band that you think is cool. That's how I discovered I'm drawing a blank. It's Cough Syrup was the big tune that they had. Young the Giant. Like it was a early, and that's actually how I discovered Billie Eilish years and years ago. Something came up, she was on an indie playlist, and I heard Ocean Eyes. It's like, who's this band, Billie Eilish? I really think they're cool. So the fact that I still get awoken by really cool music, and if I like something and then other people end up liking it, it's like, okay, I still feel connected to humanity. That gets me inspired to, like, something new is going to come out tomorrow that I haven't heard, that a gazillion people are going to love, and I get to discover it along with them. And that's why I love, like, I got nothing bad to say about technology, because it is all about, like, my record collection has expanded a gazillion fold. And I come from an era where you had to save up, you had to go to try to find it, and was it even available? I remember hearing Higher Ground and seeing the Chili Peppers video, and when I went to buy the CD, they didn't have it. So I bought the earlier records, and that was its own kind of cool thing. But now I just like hearing a new tune for the first time and going, wow, that is awesome. Or nope, pass, next, and then finding something else I love.
That happens. We all have our taste and likes, but I think that it's so important, and I think it's beautiful that you still love music.
Yes.
Music, not anything, just not in a closed-minded way, but it shows in your playing, it shows in your passion, and I think it's awesome.
I hope we all just keep it. Like I said, the community of guys I play with they all have that mindset. So if I'm around people with the growth mindset, it always informs me to, like, we don't all have to chase, that was better in the 70s or better in the 80s, whatever your favorite era is. I love everything that I loved, but hearing new stuff, I'm excited to be in, to talk to you, to people that are excited. Like, just the fact that we're having a conversation, like, it's exciting that there's still undiscovered ideas about doing the thing that we do.
Yes.
That would be like, hey, it's 2021. I thought we'd have it all figured out by now, but guess what? We don't. And that's cool.
And that is the truth. And that is cool. Dude, thank you so much for jumping on here, man. It's
My
really
pleasure.
good to see you and talk to you. It's been a while. Man, I appreciate you, brother. And I'm so glad that we're still connected.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to everything that you're doing, and I can't wait to hear it. Hopefully you got a solo thing at some point.
So one of these days, I will do something maybe where there aren't people singing, so that you'll hear something more than the undercurrent. But I still get
I think
get
people
so
hear
excited.
more than you actually think, brother. I think they do. They feel it. You're making music. It's beautiful.
Making people move.
Yes, sir. That is our show for today. Thank you again for joining us, Sean. And stay healthy and kind. Spread love, good vibes, and inspiration. And remember, friends, you got this. Follow your path and just play. I'm Josh Paul. Hope to see you out there sometime soon. And thank you to Dunlop for making this show possible. Be sure to check out Bass Freaks wherever you get your podcasts. Cheers.